Good evening, and thank you for tuning into tonight's conversation on innovative participation strategies. My name is Andrew Sloan and I'm from Southwest Sport down in Warrnambool, and I'd like to start tonight by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are all meeting tonight and pay our respects to their elders past, present and those emerging. Tonight's conversation is supported by Vic Health and Sport and Rec Victoria and is brought to you by Southwest Sport and Leisure Networks on behalf of Regional Sport Victoria. Regional Sport Victoria, or RSV as it's commonly known, is the peak body for the 9 independent regional sports assemblies who play a critical role of supporting the sport and rec sector within their regional catchments. RSV is the only statewide agency in Victoria that supports regionally based community sport and rec through the provision of training, information and advice, skill development and advocacy for clubs, organisations and communities. Now, we are operating in a very different environment at the moment, so please be patient with us, which you've already been this evening. And forgive us for any of our presenters that might have some at-home interruptions. Unfortunately, the technological bug has already hit and we've had a couple of presenters unable to log in, so please bear with us for that. But tonight is the third in our series of presentations, which has so far covered finances and strategic planning. But tonight, our panel will explore the role of innovative participation strategies as we get set to return to play. This session has always also been promoted as a member engagement session. However, we'll be focusing more our discussion on the impact of COVID-19 on different sporting formats. If you have any specific member engagement questions for the panel, we encourage you to make use of the chat feature. There'll be no slides tonight, and we'll aim to allow time for questions. So if you do have any questions for the speakers, please submit them as they come to mind and we'll endeavour to answer them. If you're using a computer, the chat function is on the toolbar and you can access this by clicking the speech bubble. If using your phone, the speech bubble can be accessed at the top right corner of your screen. With all the formalities done, let's get on with our meeting for tonight and let's introduce our panel. From Vic Sport, we actually do have Participation Strategy Manager, Tom Dixon.
Hi Andrew, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Tom. From Vic Health, we have Principal Program Officer of Physical Activity, Sport and Healthy Communities, Melissa Backhouse. Evening, Mel.
Hi everyone, nice to be here.
Good to hear. We do have a couple of guests, as I said, who were unable to log in. We had Warrnambool City Council Rec Planner Kim Rowe and Warrnambool Triathlon Club President Ian Barnes. I will hopefully be able to fill in for them. But our final guest this evening is from AFL Western Region, the Commercial and Operations Manager, Matthew Ross. Evening, Matt.
Thanks, Andrew. Glad to be here.
Fantastic. Welcome to you all and thank you for joining us. I might start tonight with Tom Dixon from Vic Sport. Tom, you guys at Vic Sport have got a great statewide view of what's happening and taking all the information in as the industry as a collective gets set to return to play. What things are you hearing from SSAs? What challenges are they facing at the moment? And are you hearing anything from grassroots clubs?
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, we've had a lot of communication with all of our members during this very difficult time. Certainly at the moment, the focus is on probably more the practicalities of returning to play. Some of the, I guess, the concerns that have come up frequently during this time include, one, I guess, the financial viability of a lot of sport organisations, right down to grassroots clubs, and there has been a lot of impact on jobs across the sports sector. But things like how can we engage and, I guess, retain the members that we had, volunteers, are they going to come back? How can we retain and engage those people? And interestingly, probably a lot of the focus really is getting back to the core business, and some of the innovative modified formats that are being pushed, could be on the back burner for a little while, or in some sports, in some scenarios, they could be quite a useful way to re-engage people. So sports are in many ways quite unique and varied, but in other ways quite similar. So there's a lot of strong themes. But yeah, probably the focus at the moment and the work we're doing with the state government is about helping all of the state sport associations get a clear plan in place for return to play and make sure that's available to all of the clubs, regional sports assemblies and local councils so people can work together and just get people back playing when those restrictions are lifted.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Tom. It's really interesting, and it's a tough challenge, I guess, to try and mitigate the risks, and we'll cover some of those later on. Matt Ross from AFL Western Region, I'm really interested by what Tom has just said. I mean, what is the objective of sport resuming? Is it to operate just as we always have, or what's your view on the world, particularly from an AFL perspective? Just sorry.
Yeah, I do agree with Tom a little bit there, is that these innovative concepts of, I guess, some alterations of our traditional game are a little bit hard to implement at a moment's notice, and especially in these trying times at the moment. So I think our main objective is to keep our clubs connected. Being able to train at a minimum is a great start. Keeping people involved in that club engaged, in a likelihood that they'll return next year.
Yeah, absolutely, and that engagement is so critical. I mean, Mel Backhouse from Vic Health, whilst we know it could be difficult to try and restart in a different format, is there room for clubs to potentially have a range of offerings beyond those traditional formats of their game?
Yeah, Andrew, in an ideal world, I think clubs would offer, traditional competition, and they would offer social and modified forms. We know that sport isn't necessarily, it's underrepresented by a lot of different groups who don't feel like they can engage with sport in its traditional form. So the more varieties we have, the more people sport will be able to reach. And I think there's an opportunity, in the moment, with not being able to run any competitions in their normal format, that some of these other formats of sport could be trialled.
It's such a challenge for clubs, I think, with the variety of things that they have to do off field as it is now anyway, and we're expecting them to do child safe standards and, get their RSAs in order and all the rest of it. Dr. Bridie O'Donnell mentioned recently about how this is a really unique situation that's been presented to us, and sport has an opportunity not just to bounce back, but maybe to bounce forward. So Tom, that leads me to you. How do clubs revert to not just those traditional formats and behaviours, and how do they actually be a little bit more inclusive, given that they can't traditionally do their traditional formats at the moment?
Yeah, I'll talk about that, and I think the point that was raised there around the amount of pressure that is put on volunteers through regulation and different things. So I'd say that what I'm hearing from clubs up through state sport associations is that it's not a good time to be putting any more pressure on people. So it's really got to be situation and context led, and whatever works for each club. In terms of bouncing forward in pure numbers, yes, that might be tough, but a version of bouncing forward that I'd like to suggest is just around having that stronger connection with members and with the local community. A lot of the work that I do around innovation, and that's always my favourite part of my role, and do a lot of work with Vic Health, it comes down to empathy and understanding, and sometimes being creative. So I'll even throw in a little tip, is just building that empathy and understanding with people in the now. And that could be just asking different types of questions of people when we do chat online, or even when we meet face to face. So when we say to each other, how are you going? The answer is always, yeah, I'm good. But it could be asking questions like, what are you looking forward to when the lockdown ends? And you're likely to get an answer that perhaps opens up a few more insights about how the person's feeling, or how is working from home being for you? How has this impacted you? So just having that kind of conversation with the members, I think, would open up insights, and then the relevant path forward for each club to bounce back becomes more clear with that understanding and connection with people in the current moment.
Innovation is a really interesting term and an interesting concept, because I don't think of myself as being innovative in particular. So I'm imagining there's quite a few people out there that don't think they're particularly innovative. Beyond asking those sorts of questions that you just referred to, what other tips and tricks have you got for clubs that think, well, okay, we can't play 18-a-side Aussie rules matches at the moment? How do they be innovative?
Well, there's been some really good examples of, strategies to engage members online, doing things like at-home challenges. think Squash Victoria have been running a game show in noting that world-class squash players aren't known outside the sport, but they're very famous and popular within the sport. So it might be just looking at those options to, I think, just have a bit of fun. I think that's what a lot of the at-home challenges have been based on, almost going back to the primary school notion of play and just inventing a game with what you have. So perhaps there's an opportunity to get people together. Yes, whether you've got restrictions around having no physical contact yet, perhaps there's a chance to do some training and just invent some fun games and just get people laughing and just enjoying that moment of being back in the club environment.
So Matthew Ross, can we expect a Hampton League Markers Up competition anytime soon?
Yes, I think by and large our leagues are very innovative. They're always thinking of things they can do outside the box, and things like that just spruik people's interest, I guess. At the end of the day, our seasons are very predictable in what we do. So anything we can do to change things up and maintain people's interest is really good. I think that as a sport, particularly football, there's a lot of emerging sports out there now, which are great for the community, but we do see them as our competitors in some ways. But anything that we can do to make our sport attractive and keep people involved, we'll definitely look at making some changes where we need to.
And it's a really good point around that member engagement for both on-field and off-field. We're certainly hearing a lot around, how do we get people back to our club, or how do we keep them engaged whilst we can't physically be together? We heard on Tuesday night from our colleagues in Gippsland that their local football club, they were doing Thursday night virtual teas where they're posting, what they're having for dinner. They're doing mock team selections and finding those sorts of ways to keep their members all engaged, all the things that they would normally be doing, but just doing it virtually. From a practical on-ground example, and as I mentioned before, Ian's unable to log in with us tonight, but the Warrnambool Triathlon Club have dipped their toe in the water for doing virtual races, setting up a course using Strava and some of these innovative online apps to get their members out and about, record their times and have races that way. No doubt moving forward, Matt, I'll direct this to you. There's going to be a potential where some leagues are looking at trying to get some sort of competition up and running. Don't know when that's going to be exactly. Do you think there's going to be much of an issue from the crossover from winter to summer seasons, and how do leagues even try and fit that in?
Yeah, we've probably had a bit of a benefit with our relationship with Cricket Victoria. So AFL Victoria and Cricket Victoria have worked really well together to come to an agreement at the back end of the season where our community football would get priority scheduling into October, where traditionally we'd generally sort of finish in September. So it does buy us a little time. I mean, where we are today, time is rapidly running out to run probably some of our traditional length seasons. It's a real pinch point in the next probably 2 to 3 weeks for leagues to make a decision to generally fit in half of a season is the sort of consensus that I'm hearing. Yeah, that crossover period of time, it's hard on volunteers, I think, that are involved in both sports. There's a very short changeover period of time, whereas traditionally you might have a little bit of a break between football and then say rolling into, say, a cricket, as well as for our players. Not to mention that often clubs are turning their attention to pre-season pretty early these days, with a lot of clubs starting November. So really, I guess at the moment, just a little bit wary of potential burnout amongst our volunteers and participants if we do get some sort of a season up and going here this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with, but maybe for you, Mel, if these clubs can't necessarily get a normal season in, how do they, what process can they go through to try and find an alternative?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of uncertainty at the moment. So clubs, should be going through planning for various scenarios, but I mean, one of the options is to not run a competitive season at all, and that way you're guaranteed you can provide something. It might be 10 or the 20 people, whenever the limits change of how many people can train together. And I'd really encourage clubs to speak to their members and ask them what they want to do. I mean, that's the best way to meet their need, is to find out directly from them. Do they want to run a social game? Do they want to do some skills trainings? Do they, how do they see it working? If we're talking about being innovative, if you don't feel innovative yourself, you can definitely ask other people, and the kids or the other adults there will give you some great ideas. But we'd certainly encourage thinking outside the norm of what your sport is. Don't be constrained by the current rules, uniforms. Even we're seeing people that want to drop in and out of sport. So look at some kind of model. If you're engaging new people, if they pay as they go rather than paying sort of a committed membership. So there's all sorts of different ways of doing some rapid prototyping and then adjusting it as you go through having those conversations with people. But there's really excellent things that will come out of that. The other thing I would say is some sports have social and modified forms of the game that could easily be picked up and are well tested and you could run with, things like soccer mums and that sort of thing, social sixes for cricket. They're already out there and they're already working, so you could follow a proven model.
Yeah, good point. And I guess from an AFL sense, Matt, we've seen over the last few years AFL 9s, certainly at a local community level, and AFL-X has been sampled as well. How legitimate do you think it would be for a league to go in consultation with their clubs? This is what we're going to do for 10 weeks.
Yeah, I think that the AFL-X and AFL 9s works really well in probably areas where we don't have traditional, I guess, Aussie rules sport or cricket, given that it's sort of played on a rugby field or a soccer field. I think one of the key things for us as a sport at the moment is, and it's key for the whole industry in the AFL, is the competition for time. So people's time is really valuable these days, and they're not willing to probably spend a whole Saturday at the footy. As brutal as that sounds, that is what it is. There's a lot more things that people can do. There's all these pursuits. There's Netflix. There's all these other sports. So I guess AFL-X and AFL 9s has the benefit of being a bit of a shortened format of the game. I think in terms of facilities, it's probably not as important for us to pursue that. But I think that, if leagues were looking to do something like that, I think they'd do that in conjunction with their clubs, so there'd be a strong linkage in clubs. I don't think it'd be a standalone, separate competition. I think we need to leverage off those club relationships and structures if we're going to look at that. But I think there's definitely some advantages to it, and no doubt at some stage, it will emerge a little bit in our local areas.
Yeah, Tom, I'm interested to pick up on a point that Matt had there about those shortened formats of the game and applying that to an indoor facility setting. So I'm imagining a multi-sport facility that exists in various townships. Maybe it's a basketball association is doing 3-on-3. How do they manage that? How are councils going to manage that with having, hundreds of people lining up, waiting for their turn, exiting? Are you hearing anything from your end on that?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of questions about that, and whose responsibility it will be to have those risk management plans in place, and whose responsibility it is to clean the venues as well, which is going to be so important moving forward. So I guess it really depends on the particular facility arrangements and whether the council directly manages an indoor venue, which is often the case, or a group like a YMCA. So in those cases, probably they might have ownership of a lot of that. When it comes down to clubs, unfortunately, in some cases it might be on the clubs and the volunteers to take charge of, buying more hand sanitizers and putting things in place. So it's going to depend on each situation, but I think that's when you talk about innovation and people's experience, one of those key touch points of people coming back is going to be has this venue been set up to be clean and safe for me to come back to? I think that's going to be a really important consideration for a lot of people.
Yeah, we've certainly been speaking with a lot of clubs in recent times, and one of the reoccurring themes is that they are keen to get back, but they want to do it safely. So when we pick up on those concerns, a lot of clubs are worried that people just simply don't come back to their club. It certainly seems like there are a lot of people actively participating recreationally, seeing them doing bike rides and dogs being walked and all these things. Do you think there's a risk, and this is open to anyone, is there a risk of people dropping out of our clubs?
I'm happy to go first on that. I think there absolutely is. And the economy itself has taken a huge hit. So I think there is a risk that if there's more people out of work, stressed about that sort of life circumstance, that sport sort of gets pushed down the priority list. Another thing I just want to add that touches on Matt sort of referenced before, there is a long-term trend around people looking for shorter sessions, shorter engagement in sport, wanting to fit that into a busy lifestyle. Data from Sport Australia over the past 20 years sort of backs up that there's a lot less people who just do traditional types of sport as their participation, and there's still a lot of people doing sport, but there's more that do both. So perhaps there's more people that might be part of a footy or a cricket club, but also are doing yoga or walking the dog or whatever. And certainly for women and girls, yoga and Pilates has been going gangbusters in recent years. So that's probably something that clubs can think about is, how can we re-engage people and just have something that doesn't require them to be at the club 2 nights a week and all day on Saturday, but still provides that really excellent touch points and engagement during the week, even if it's just once or twice, something people can engage with, but recognise that if they don't want to be hanging around the club and having a meal, that's not what everyone wants. Equally, a lot of people still do, and I'm sure can't wait to get back to the club and to do that.
Can I add on that, Andrew?
Go for it.
Just also, I think while there is a risk that some people might not return to sport, we've seen increased respect for the value of exercise in our lives. It's one of the 4 things that the government was encouraging us to do. There was a lot more people out there walking and cycling with their families and spending quality time together. And so there's a potential to capitalise on people's interest in exercise and that enjoyment of their family time and that kind of thing by offering them something that's relevant to them. And so you might find that while you're re-engaging your traditional members, you can also ask them to reach out and bring a friend, and someone that might not play a competitive sport might come to a social sport with their friend in that kind of environment. So I think there's ways that we can reach out to people that haven't been involved in sport before and tell them that we're relevant to them, that we're offering them something that they want to do, and even listening to, as I said before, asking them what they want and then responding to that. Really, there's limited risk with doing this, and there's a lot of upside if it does work. So this provides an opportunity to test something you may not have been able to test, if the season had been a regular season, but now you've got an opportunity to just test it. If it doesn't work, it's fine. If it does, it may be something you can continue to do in future years to broaden your relevance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I just want to pick up on something that's come through on the comments from Paul and Lynn from Wodonga, that the economic impact of COVID-19 is no doubt going to be playing a factor, as people may not have that discretionary income that they've previously had. But also that clubs will really need to look at that social and training context to really bring their members back, and if not, open up the doors to a new crowd. Mel, from a Vic Health perspective, and Tom, this is probably relevant for you too, what are the things, if clubs go down this path of something a bit different, a little bit innovative, what are the things that they really need to hone in on to have people keep coming back for these modified versions of sport?
We've actually partnered with yourselves, the Regional Sport Assembly, and state sporting organisations, and indeed a lot of sporting clubs over the last 5 or 6 years to look at social modified forms of sport. And last year we published a resource called Doing Sport Differently, which if you look up www.doingsportdifferently.com.au, it's got 6 principles that are kind of the general principles to follow. They're quite straightforward. The first one is about speaking to people about what they want, being innovative, and managing the experience that the person has from even when you're marketing to them all the way through to inviting them back the next time. And the other critical thing is really the coach or the deliverer is, as most people in community sport would know, the linchpin. They make or break the experience for the person. So making sure that that person that's providing the experience is welcoming and understands the needs of the participant, whether that be, to be stretched in a competitive sense, or to be able to do, to learn their own skills and progress at their own rate. So I think, it's worth checking out that document and having a look at those principles for where to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mel. And it is a great resource for our clubs listening tonight. I'll just throw to the chat on the side again. This is a question probably directed to you, Matt, and feel free to give a political answer if you need to. But what do you think the effect of reduced club income for those leagues that do actually get a football season up and running? Is this a great chance for clubs to go, we're not paying you the same as we used to, and reset that age-old dilemma? Or what's your view on that?
It is a tough one to answer, Andrew. It's a very contentious issue, I know, across the sport. I think that to make our local region and the leagues and clubs financially viable, it's definitely an area of focus that we need to look at. But we still need to be, I guess, cognizant of the realities that some clubs face in our area as well. So, a couple of bucks at one club is not really the same as a couple of bucks at another club. I look at our region in the Western District, and we've got some towns that are fairly close to some major centres, or some larger towns being, say, your Warrnambool and Hamilton and Portland. But there's also some clubs that are based in some sort of more rural, a lot more travel involved, obviously, with where they're located. So you sort of do need to recognise that some clubs might have enough players to field 75% of their team, and they might need to actually pay 25% of their team to actually travel into that region to play the sport. And when we say pay them, it's basically compensation for their travel. If a player lives in a regional town, they might be able to work before the sport, and then they might rock up an hour before the game starts. So if people are traveling an hour and a half or 2 hours, they're really foregoing that opportunity to work. So it is a tough one to answer, but I think that reduced income definitely means that player payments need to be looked at. But I think we just still need to be mindful that there's probably some circumstances where we still need to have a bit of flexibility to allow some level of payment to players.
Yeah, and staying on the topic of finances, maybe a question for you, Tom, is sometimes new or modified sports are priced pretty cheaply, $5 thereabouts, to encourage that participation and build that critical mass. Do you have any advice for clubs in regards to pricing, particularly given the economic times that we're currently in?
Probably the advice would be to consider offering things at a fairly low cost, or, as Mel mentioned earlier, having those flexible payment opportunities. But it's tricky it's balancing that with something that's quality as well. And the growth of all the yogas, Pilates, CrossFits have shown that people's willingness to pay is actually quite high when things are made really, really easy for them. But I guess at the club level, if something's being delivered by volunteers where you've already got access to that particular facility, then I'd say, just trying to offer things that are, under an hour, very much focused on fun and skill developments and just the enjoyment of participants, and something that in the short term perhaps is sort of a pay-as-you-go or just pay-to-play type model, just to engage people in that more social format.
Yeah, and I guess it's all in the thought bubble of keeping our members, engaged with our clubs. But what about those clubs who've got members who don't want to play modified formats, and the club might not be in a position to actually offer anything but a modified format? Is there any advice that you can give for clubs to mitigate that risk?
So do you mind just confirming if they can't do modified formats at all?
No, if they can't do their traditional format of their game, but they've got members who don't want to play the modified format, is there a way that you think clubs can approach that with their members?
I'm not sure, to be honest. It probably is quite tough. I mean, I think we've got to probably respect that, yeah, for a lot of clubs, doing the modified formats might not be an easy option, as you say. And, the government came out and suggested people won't be having big fundraising barbecues either. So I think definitely looking at the grants that the government have put out recently in providing some financial relief for clubs is a good option. But probably that just might come back to what we've been saying around just engaging members and having a conversation and just trying to understand where they're at and spark some different innovative ideas. And maybe there's something else that I can't think of now that clubs might come up with as a new opportunity to run something, sporty or not, to engage people and generate a little bit of income.
Yeah, and to be honest, we're seeing some really innovative things in the chats here, from weekly online catch-ups between coaches and still being able to do some raffles and that type of thing. Different clubs, a swim club offering something to football clubs, reduced rates and that type of thing. I think that's a real testament to this industry as a whole, where people are really bandied together to try and find these different innovative ways of staying afloat. Mel, from a Vic Health perspective, are you seeing much more than what we're hearing tonight?
In terms of that question about if they don't want to do social modified, or do you mean other ways that clubs are I guess, providing options?
Whatever you'd like to go with.
Yeah, well, we've seen some Surfing Victoria put some really good resources online for stand-up paddleboarding and how to practice some of those skills at home and build your strength and flexibility. We've heard about skateboarding, looking at putting some of their like tricks and things like that online for young people to be able to do in the street, given that you skate or ride in the street. So lots of sports are looking to that. I think Netball Victoria are as well, some online resources. Yeah, a lot of people are looking at being able to train coaches and officials and using this time to upskill people in a kind of a professional development sense. So there's some really great things out there happening.
Yeah, you're not wrong. And I think particularly in the innovation space too, I mean, I've never heard the word Zoom so much in my life. Matt, a question for you. We've got so many various apps and online training being posted all over the place, and we see that in the chat comments as well. How much of a role do you think these might have in the future for people to engage with in their club?
Yeah, I definitely think there's a place for it. I think once, or when things, if they do return to normal, I think people would have a real thirst to be physically present at their club for training, and this might sort of more complement that. I think more broadly speaking, though, I guess that we think about how our volunteer committees are meeting, and we're probably very traditional in that we're driving at night and we're meeting in club rooms and so forth to meet. And I remember one time driving for an hour and a half to a meeting, and there's 40 cars at an oval, and I thought to myself, everyone's driven in the dark, they're away from their families, they might have up to an hour commute to get there, and then they're driving home in the dark and getting home quite late and missing that family time, but also driving on some pretty scary roads at night. So I think the real good thing to come out of it for us will be using this technology. We've been forced to use it. Some people don't want to change, but I think at the moment we've been forced into it. I think people can see that it works. So I think overall we'd like to probably get this out amongst our volunteer groups, just making their lives that much easier. It's so hard to actually attract volunteers, but if you can make their involvement a bit more accessible and easier, then it becomes a little bit of an easier job. So Zoom and Google Meets and Hangouts and whatever else have been really good for us. And I was thinking, just to a question before on about clubs raising income, there's also the fact that a lot of clubs are actually putting income into their communities as well. I think there's been some pleasing activities done by some clubs in the area, particularly one I think of is the Warrnambool Football Netball Club, who have actually nominated a night a week to go out and buy a takeaway meal. So it's takeaway meals one night a week, and they'll select one business that supported them in the past, and they'll all go there and buy their dinner and upload photos of everyone with the dinner. I know a few other clubs. I know the Old Collegians Football Club have done a similar thing with their sponsors. So in a way, I think that the clubs are, they're looking at raising income for themselves, but they're also probably recognising that they don't necessarily need it if their competitions aren't proceeding, and they're actually getting out there and supporting the community, which is really good as well.
That's a fantastic answer, Matt, and actually ties in perfectly to a question posted on the side here. We've got this really strong sense of community that has existed through COVID-19, and the question being posed there is, what do you think will be the most positive legacy of COVID-19? And open to any panel member to jump in on this one.
Clean hands, I think, Andrew. Washing your hands regularly would be good.
It might be, as Matt's been alluding to, that stronger feeling of connection that adds to the culture of the clubs as small communities themselves, because this pandemic has opened up a lot of vulnerabilities, and I think everyone has been much more open about how they're feeling about working from home and whether they've been impacted or whether they've known people who've lost work. So I think I'd like to see that that's hopefully a great outcome, is that there is that stronger connection and understanding between people in clubs. And just adding on what Matt was just saying, I used to work at Cycling Victoria, and there's cycling clubs out there that don't actually have club rooms. A good example was the St Kilda Cycling Club that built a really great program and attracted a lot more women and girls to cycling and had races and recreation, and they've never had a single club room. So they've built really a big community of cyclists, and there's a lot of other sports that are similar. So for those more traditional, very popular sports like football and netball and cricket, it's how the clubs can think about, we're actually a community of like-minded people who do things together. It's not always just about being at the physical location, and the more we can build that strong connection, then the better the future outcomes will be, and the engagement of members, but also the engagement of volunteers.
Andrew, I'll just with my thoughts. Like, I think everything the other panelists have said is spot on, but also I think it's kind of up to us to decide what the legacy of COVID is. And I'll read a quote from the CEO of Sport New Zealand, because I think it really just inspires us to be creative and to think outside the box. He said, because this is a once in a 50-year opportunity, we have to make the most of the chance to reimagine how sport will look in the future, and what will best enable it to meet the needs of all New Zealanders in their case, including those who are underrepresented in sport. Our sector won't maximise our future potential if we simply replay our current approach. So, I mean, that question about the legacy, it's really up to each of us to create that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, Paul and Lynn from Wodonga, the fact that COVID-19 has really pushed clubs out of their comfort zone to try new technologies and think outside the square of how to connect with their members. And as we've covered, there's a plethora of different things people can do. And I think possibly moving forward as well is your league might not have got a season up and running, as we are seeing in the comments here, but perhaps your team can get together and participate in a sport that is being able to be offered at some point in time. So you've still got that social connection, which is so pivotal to our mental health. And a shameless plug for Southwest Sports mental health online session tomorrow night. So check out Facebook for that one. If any clubs out there aren't quite sure on what they should be doing or how to go about things and connecting with their members, I would strongly encourage you to connect with your regional sports assemblies. I'm sure Tom would love to have people hit him up on Facebook as well through Vic Sport, and probably similar to Vic Health with their Doing Sport Differently, which really maps out some critical thinking in what we do moving forward. I'd really like to throw it open to any listeners out there. If you do have a burning question that you'd like to ask our panel, because we're starting to run out of time as I look at the clock. So now's the time to get those in. One thing I'll pose while we're waiting for some of those questions. We are so keen to get back into our clubs at the moment. We've missed our mates, we've missed our training, we've missed our games. How do clubs take that balance of doing the right thing, following the return to play guides, and suggesting that people stay away if they do have those flu-like symptoms and not be too overly keen on coming back? Go for it, Tom.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I think definitely make sure you're following your state sport association guidelines, and if the particular ones aren't ready as yet, I know a few like tennis went pretty early and did really good work, but so looking at the guidelines and the resources that are definitely out there that can support people with what's appropriate at each stage is really important. But I do think also just don't put too much pressure on yourselves as volunteers to achieve a lot right away. I think the more we've learned about the situation we're in, I think the re-engagement and return to play process is not just something over a couple of weeks, it's probably something really over close to a year. And we'll be talking about this for many, many years to come. So I think just do what you can, focus on connecting with people and understanding where they're at the present time, but without, adding that sort of pressure on volunteers and, pressure on yourself. So that's probably my advice there.
Matthew, would you echo Tom's sentiments there?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a tough time for clubs to comply with these additional regulations, but I think it's worthwhile pushing through and getting them implemented in your club and getting your players engaged. I think there's a really good quote flying around that people deal better with catastrophe than they do uncertainty, and that's all we're dealing with at the moment. And the uncertainty is when will this finish? Is it better to take the hard pill now and start to work within these regulations and protocols with a view that potentially next year we could be operating within the same regime? So I think the sooner that we can get past that and treat this as a new normal, the better, and life will be easy if they did disappear, but let's just try and get them in place and work with them now.
Absolutely. Look, there's not too many more questions coming through at the moment. The last one is probably something we've covered anyway, but maybe as a parting thought to our listeners, for those that are looking at doing sport differently, your best piece of advice from each presenter, please.
I'll start. Well, I'll point out, and I hope I don't steal Mel's thunder on this if she was making a point, but we do a lot of work with Big Health and the Doing Sport Differently. So I would point out that that resource and those principles are designed to target people that are less active in sport and recreation, and is generally sort of at least 60% of the population. So when we talk about doing things differently, we're talking about engaging a lot of people out there. So just consider that, I guess don't limit yourselves in who you think in your local community you could actually target. Consider how you can offer everyone some kind of experience.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I would just say, or encourage everybody, if you have got volunteers that are looking for something to re-engage members and broaden the reach of your club, to have a go. There really is limited risk at the moment and only upside. The clubs that we work with that do run these social programs and bring in new people to their club benefit a lot from that in terms of, when things are in, a similar normal state, more people through the canteen, more merchandise sales, more membership, or more program revenue. So, and just a general more welcoming feel around the club in terms of the values the club has and the inclusivity that the club has. So there's only upside. Give it a go and do it in a way that is relatively simple and limits your risk.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I don't think we have to reinvent the wheel in terms of the format of the game. I think it's, yeah, totally, as to what Tom said before, it's about attracting people into our sports that aren't otherwise represented as they should. So I think of us as an example, and obviously female football is a really high growth area. We in the Western District presently, of our playing numbers, are probably 5 to 10% are female, and last time I checked, females are 50% of the population. So I don't think we have to change the game. I think we just need to make it more accessible to those groups. And if that means that we need to look at our facilities or the way we work or how we engage with our community and the type of engagement we're doing, well, I think that'll be it'll pay off in the long run for us.
Some really fantastic inclusive language and messages there from all three speakers. I just wanted to pick up on one little point. We've heard a lot in the last several weeks around looking after our volunteers. You guys tonight listening, you are the volunteers. So we hope you are looking after yourselves as well as your clubs. And we certainly encourage you to reach out to your regional sports assembly. We're located right around the state for that extra support. That's why we exist. So we hope you do that. And we would love to certainly hear from you in due course. I'll just have a quick little scan on the last couple of questions here. To look at modified sport, do we need to have full insurance for the club to do training or modified matches? I think that's probably a case-by-case basis and very much worth checking in with your state sporting association or private insurer if that's your club setup. Finding information regarding designing a program for at-risk community members, those that can't afford swimming lessons. Certainly SSAs have over the journey developed different programs targeting different people. So be, again, well worth directing that to your SSA. And thanks, Paul and Lynn, lovely comments there. You can come back again. Guys, I'm going to wrap it up there. It's been a fantastic evening. If anyone does have any other questions, we are more than happy for you to get in touch with us offline. I would like to wrap up and say a massive thank you to Matt, to Mel and to Tom, and also Brooke, who's been hiding behind the scenes, driving all that you've seen tonight. And we've really heard from that variety of our stakeholders in our sport and rec industry. So whilst COVID-19 has cast a lot of uncertainty on the way forward for us, we can see that all sports have the opportunity to resume or at least engage with their members in some format or another. Those sports that can adapt and modify their offering, they will give themselves the best chance of keeping their members engaged, if not generate some new members along the journey. Thank you very much for your viewership this evening. Please don't hesitate to get in touch with your regional sports assembly for further assistance, and we bid you a good night. Thank you.